to the penultimate program of this incredibly exciting season we've had, which leads me to the premise that the less money you, no, I won't say that, but you can do a lot with little, but we need more in order to keep our doors open. I'm just going to say that in the very beginning. We need your help. But anyway, welcome to Love and Pleasure in the Age of Electricity. Before we continue today's program, I wanted to make a couple of announcements. Firstly, next week is Aging and Creativity, and that's the final roundtable of the season, and we have from Yale, Gordon Rogoff and Eleanor Fuchs, both thinkers about theater, and they particularly will talk, I believe, I'm putting words in their mouth, but I'm going to say it. They have to mention When We Dead Awake, and they have to talk about late Ibsen. They've got to talk about late Shakespeare. So if you're interested in those things, I'd say that's a good starting point. But anyway, we're dealing with the whole subject of creation later in life, and the notion that there isn't actually a diminution of abilities, but that there is sometimes even an explosion of creative energy in the later years of life. Added to that panel, I'm very excited about it, is Carmen DeLavalade. She's coming, yes. And Patricia Bloom, Associate Professor of Geriatrics at Internal Medicine at Mount Sinai. That's really a Philoctetes type panel, because we have people from academic discipline, we have a performer, and we have a person from the world of medicine. So all and Diane Meyer from Mount Sinai was very important in helping us to get that person. I want to thank her about that. As all of you know, our programs are, if you go to our site, philoctetes.org, our programs are available under past programming. We record everything, and they are also on YouTube, where they've received more than 300,000 hits. So Philoctetes is a hit. We've received grants from the New York State Council on the Arts in poetry and in music. We don't know the exact amounts, but we've been told we're getting them. And the Department of Cultural Affairs of the City of New York, we want to thank them for the grant they've given us, which has enabled this very program to proceed. We have gotten grants also from Bloomberg and from Leon Levy Foundation, from the Templeton Foundation. But the granting that we get from public foundations is not enough to keep this place alive, and we really need the help in big ways, in small ways, of patrons and people who have the following of the Philoctetes Center is what is made possible all of our programs this year. Lastly, the art on the walls you will see is from the show The Matter of Time, and it coincided with our wonderful Time panel from last week. And the artists represented in that show are John Boone, Catherine Davis, Edward Johnson, Elliot Kaufman, Catherine Rogers, Linda Stillman, and Ellen Weiner, whose oddly shaped work of art you see right over there. Extraordinary, actually. So now I'm very pleased to present Anne Cattaneo. I love Anne Cattaneo. I've known her only 40 years, I guess.
That's true.
Anne Cattaneo is the dramaturg of Lincoln Center Theater and creator and head of the Lincoln Center Theater Directors Lab. A three-time past president of Literary Managers and Dramaturgs of the Americas, she is the recipient of the LMDA's first Lessing Award for Lifetime Achievement in Dramaturgy. And Anne will moderate this afternoon's panel and introduce our distinguished guests. So, take it away.
I don't think I've ever been introduced as kindly as I'm going to, since you're all looking at the same piece of paper I am, I'm going to, can you hear me? Okay, so I need to keep talking and...
We can hear your heart.
It's beating because he loves me. What can I do? It's great. I'll keep talking. Is this better? No? Okay.
Are we all?
Are we all on?
I'm on.
Can we hear you? How about this?
No.
Getting better?
This is in the age of technology.
Yes, there we go.
Start with the technological problem.
Let's see. Can you hear me a little better now? No.
Tap
It's
your...
Anne.
Tap this? I've always was taught never to tap the microphone. So. Okay, is it better now? Can you hear me?
Okay.
All right? Okay, start. So thank you to Ed and to Francis. So we're looking at the same piece of paper. I'll just signal a highlight of each of our panelists. We actually planned this event some time ago, and we were to have 4 panelists. The first panelist, of course, is the author of this play, In the Next Room or the Vibrator Play, Sarah Rule. And I actually asked her this week if she would like to be a disembodied voice on a speakerphone. She said that's so apropos of the theme of your discussion, but I just don't think I could handle it. She's expecting twins and is home resting in bed, but she has sent her husband Tony, so thank you for coming, and I may call upon you in effect. So follow along with me, Elizabeth Auchincloss, who is Vice Chairman for Graduate Medical Education and Professor of Clinical Psychiatry at Cornell. Barry, you are Professor at Rutgers University, and Rachel Maines, Visiting Scientist at Cornell School of Electrical and Computer Engineering, and actually the germ of this play began in a book that you wrote. We're doing the play, we're producing it at Lincoln Center Theater on Broadway at the Lyceum Theater. So part of my job is to urge you to all come and see this amazing play. I've been working, working as a dramaturg on this play, and it gives us so much to talk about and to think about and to feel about, that the play is still unfolding, even though it's opened very successfully. It's in its second month of its run, and it will continue until January, because the play, while very, very moving and just very theatrical, it touches on so many issues. So I'm hoping today to open up to you all a few of those. And I thought I would begin by reading a 3-paragraph note that I put in the program, because barring the Philoctetes Center, we're trying to alert our patrons, our ticket buyers who come in, that this is not just a funny play, this is not just a very amusing play about the fact that the vibrator was invented at a certain point and was used. No one can really believe this, but it's a play of much larger import. And I got so excited about all the issues in the play that Andre Bishop, my boss, said, oh, just put these in a little program note so that everybody knows that you can think about all these different things. So I'm going to begin by just reading these 3 paragraphs and open with a question for you. We're going to have a discussion among ourselves, and then we'll open to questions from the audience after that. The play is a fictional play set in Saratoga Springs, and it deals with, as you can imagine, a doctor who is using a newly invented electrical vibrator to treat symptoms of hysteria in his patients. And we meet some of those patients in the course of the play. How much of In the Next Room or the Vibrator play belongs in the realm of history, and how much is rooted in Sarah Ruhl's imagination? The old adage that truth is stranger than fiction certainly applies here. In the play's printed stage directions, Ruhl tells us, quote, things that seem impossibly strange in the following play are all true, such as the Chattanooga vibrator, which was used on male hysterics, and the vagaries of wet nursing. Close quote. Set at the dawn of the electrical age, Ruhl's characters embrace the miracles that this magical force, electricity, brings with it. The making of light with the push of a button, the electrical appliance. One appliance advertised with as much enthusiasm as the newly invented vacuum cleaner was the electric vibrator. It was enthusiastically marketed both to physicians and to the general public. As astonishing as it may seem now, these devices were considered unremarkable and unembarrassing. They belonged to a practical realm far removed from sex. And I brought with me a copy of the Lincoln Center Theater Review, and I probably didn't bring enough copies, but many of you are looking at it. And if you turn to the back cover, you'll see the ad from the Sears Roebuck catalog, which is selling vacuum cleaners and vibrators alongside of each other. Rachel Maines, who happens to be conveniently sitting right next to me, notes that while the turn-of-the-century medical establishment was roiled by inventions such as the tampon and the speculum, the vibrator remained innocuous. As Maines wryly observes, physicians held firm to, quote, the comforting belief that only penetration was sexually stimulating to women, close quote. Quote from the play, what men do not observe because their intellect prevents them from seeing would fill many books, observes Dr. Givings in the play. Medical wisdom could not begin to find a cure or a cause for the general female malaise common at this time. Caring doctors, husbands, and wives alike struggle to understand the disease, end quote. Each age has its signature illness. I was going to quote Susan Sontag, and then I was advised that's too intellectual for a general audience, so I left that out of my speech here. Each age has a signature illness. In the 19th century, it was hysteria, from the Greek word, I'm sure as you all know, for womb. Women were its primary, though by no means its only victims. Its causes were unknown. Treatments ranged from precipitating paroxysms, that's the word that Sarah uses in the play, to treatment ranged from precipitating paroxysm by electricity to some decades later, the talking cure of Freud, who treated patients with vibrators early in his career, and the enforced rest so often prescribed to well-to-do women of the era. And we reference in this volume the Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, again, somebody you won't probably all know. Concerned physicians resorted to therapies described in medical literature that were millenniums old. The manual treatment, quote unquote, was described by ancient Greek writers. And the manual treatment you see that on stage in our play as well, underneath all the gowns that they're wearing. In the next room is a play of revelations, and perhaps none more profound than the elusive nature of sexuality itself. We live in a modern age, and we live in an age where, for instance, vibrators are still forbidden for sale in several states. And young women with access to encyclopedias of sexual information still struggle to please themselves. What do women want? Asked a baffled Freud. When I wrote that adjective, baffled, I just knew I would get in trouble when I came to the Philoctetes Center later. What do women want? Asked Freud. I'll say that. The characters, both male and female, that Rule has created in her play seek self-awareness and fulfillment, both sexually and in their family, professional, and romantic relationships. For audiences today, more than a century after the era depicted in the play, timeless parallels resonate. The discovery of the self, whether as mother, artist, wife, husband, or lover, is as present for us today as it was for the Victorians. So in my 3 paragraphs here, you begin to see all of the issues that circle around this play that Sarah addresses. And I do want to touch on all of them. I'm going to sort of start by asking Rachel to discuss her discovery of the vibrator in a museum in upstate New York. But I really want to come back to our life today, especially for young women who are living in an era of sort of media saturation of sexuality that is largely unpleasurable to them. Sarah said to me at one point in the rehearsal room, what's so interesting is the rediscovery throughout history of the female orgasm. It's discovered, it disappears for 100 years, then it comes back again, and that's something that we circle and that you think about when you come out of this play. So it's a period piece. It's about things that happened in the 19th century, but it's very much something that's relevant today. Rachel, would you just tell us what you found that day when you went to the museum upstate?
It was actually it was the Rare Books Collection, what was then called the Rare Books Collection, at Cornell. Where I am now. I wasn't at that time working at Cornell. I was upstate at Potsdam. But what I was doing was I had started out doing research on needlework, and you don't think of needlework and vibrators as being connected, but
Sure you do.
yeah. Well, and now there are patterns for knitted vibrator cozies and stuff. But at the turn of the century, you don't think of them as having been connected. But I was trying to find out about. Actually, I was trying to find out about the economics of needlework in the United States between 1880 and 1930, because of course this was an area where women were very active and had careers and so on, where it was completely open to them. There were no bars to it. So I was trying to study this, and I was going through all these old needlework magazines, and I kept seeing ads in places like Modern Priscilla. And Ladies' Home, what's it called? Woman's Home Companion. That's it. Yes, and all these magazines, Home Needlework magazine, ads for vibrators, and I thought I must just have a dirty mind. It can't be what I think, right? Because you know what the first thing, I have to tell you what the first thing was. I thought But, and I said, well, I'll just take a few notes. And I mean, I can't do anything with this. It would just completely wreck my career. So but I did write down a few notes. I am an historian by training, and and a historian of technology by choice. And so I wrote down a few notes, and finally I came across one. It was in one of the Hearst magazines for the White Cross vibrator, and in the fine print it said, "Thrilling, penetrating, invigorating, all the pleasures of youth will throb within you." And I said, now that is not my imagination. So I started doing more research on it, and I found the first reference to orgasm, this was in Latin, by the way, in Nathaniel Highmore, work written in 1666 on hysteria. And I started looking for more examples and went up to the Bakken Library Museum in Minneapolis and found some more there. And that's where The Technology of Orgasm, the book, came from.
Okay, great. And this is, of course, the period of. But when I should ask you, when is electricity invented exactly? This is the 1860s.
Well, electricity has been known about for a lot longer than you would suppose, because we have things like electric eels, and doctors used to, back before there was line electricity, doctors would take two pieces of glass and rotate them against each other, and you would hold on to these brass knobs, and it was supposed to make you feel better. It'd make you feel different anyway. Maybe different was better. And eventually they came up with like the wet cell battery, and the minute they had a wet cell battery, they hooked up something that would vibrate to it. And they sometimes they put, they hooked it up to the patient, and you get this mild electric shock. And I have not tried the critical experiment on these technologies. My experience of electrical shock is it's not that much fun, but some people evidently liked it. Anyway, the electromechanical vibrator, as far as we know, was invented in the 1880s.
Oh, 1880s. Okay.
By Joseph Mortimer Granville in Britain.
Okay. And one of the themes
Could
of
I
Sarah's...
just ask what this vibrator was like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interestingly, I don't know how many of you are in the medical world, but it was manufactured by Weiss, which is still manufacturing not vibrators, but medical instruments. It was thought of as a legitimate
Right.
medical instrument. And it had this 40-pound wet cell battery that went with it that was attached to the, because there was no line electricity in the 1880s, attached to this, it's about this big. They have one at the Bakken. It's made of metal with a leather case on it, and it has ivory vibratodes, which they're called vibratodes on the model of electrodes. What we would call what would we call them? The parts that you attach to it. The attachments. There you go. No, there's no electricity flows through them. They only vibrate. The attachments were called vibratodes. But that's 1880s. 1883, I think a book came out about it.
Right.
Well, am I correct that these were not just used for genital stimulation?
Oh, they were used, for anything.
For all the body. I mean, it was a method of treatment at the time that you used electric currents and created vibrations as a way of treating a number of physical and psychological diseases.
That's correct. And Joseph Mortimer Granville thought it was immoral to use the vibrator on hysterical women. He doesn't say why. He just says that it's immoral, you shouldn't do it.
Well, Rachel, this gets to my question. First of all, I'm completely honored to meet you, because many years ago, a friend of mine who's a historian of women's issues sent me a copy of your book, and so I'm delighted to meet you. But I have always been curious, having looked at some of these ads, did the physicians or the people prescribing the vibrator or the people buying them know that this was about sexual orgasm, or did they not know, or some of each?
It's some of each. Some doctors clearly do. Like Nathaniel Highmore, when he wrote in 1666, well, the way we treat hysteria is we produce an orgasmum. That's obviously, there's only one meaning for that word in Latin. It's a medical term at that period, so there's no question. It's a little harder to interpret. In the 19th century, in fact, this is one of the things that I think Sarah Rule does a wonderful job with, is this sort of double think going on in the doctor's minds. Right. It can't be, because there's no penetration, it can't be sex, right? And therefore, what they're experiencing has got to be the hysterical paroxysm. The women are getting all red in the face, and there's these contractions, and there's this fluid release and everything. But no, it's got nothing to do with sex.
Okay.
It's an hysterical paroxysm. Don't think otherwise. But I think what happens in the 1920s is people tumble to it and say, wait a minute. If they're using the vibrator in pornography, and the doctor's got one in his office, there's something going on here, and the doctors just drop it like a hot rock.
Right. Okay.
Interesting. Yes, because you put your finger on really one of the mysteries of what did they think was happening in these treatment rooms. And of course, as usual in the history of the world, there's more documentation from the male point of view than there is from the female point of view. So what did the women think was happening? Did they feel it sexually? I mean, they obviously did feel it sexually, but did they realize it, to put a name on it, or were they afraid to go there, et cetera? That's one of the mysteries that Sarah investigates. And she actually, we put this in the magazine as well, she actually writes in an initial stage direction that for the actors who will play in this play in the future, that each of the times that they have a paroxysm should not in any way be a completely received impression of an orgasm that we have now so endlessly available everywhere from pornography. That people have orgasms in very different ways, and to try and find out what that was for each person before the cliched image that we know today is one of the tasks she sets for her actors. And we actually printed that little stage direction in the play because we are so overwhelmed with information now of exactly how it looks and how it's supposed to look, that and that may be oppressive in its own way to people living today. I wanted to throw out something.
Can I just ask again, because I'm still not clear about this, having read about these machines is there any written evidence or any other kind of evidence that they were in fact used on the sexual organs?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
There's pictures. In fact, there's one in that book. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Although there aren't very many where they're shown being used on women. If there's a convention, they tell you about it in the text, but then they show it being used on a man, interestingly.
Yeah. And one of the, again, very playable things in the play is that you see the instrument being used on various women and a man in the course of the play, but everyone is dressed in these highly corseted, takes them 20 minutes to get all their clothes off. So this combination of the metaphor and the reality, in fact, in those days, of wearing layers and layers and layers and layers of clothing just to get access to what they're looking for takes about 20 minutes to get all the stays undone and the buttons and stuff. That combination is very vivid on stage. I have come to feel, working on the play and reading it often, that it really could be set today to some degree, in the sense that the women in this play are very nice enough to agree with the doctor that they need a paroxysm, and they get a paroxysm and they feel better. But the information about what they're feeling and how it's being treated is coming from a man, coming from a doctor. And we interviewed Peg Jornstein in the magazine, who writes for a number of papers, including the Times, about young girls today. And we kept hearing how often girls are following a mode of sexuality, blowjobs with guys they barely know. And she said she did a survey with young girls about, does this feel good to you? Is this what your sexuality is? And they described what they were doing, but the question put to them, do you feel any pleasure, was a question they were astonished to hear. Am I supposed to? Is this part of it? They didn't even know how to answer the question. And she feels by their late 20s or 30s, women begin to figure it out. But in the course of this play, what you see on stage in corsets seems very close to what's going on today among very young women who are also following a model of sexuality that they it's not organic to them. It doesn't come from them until they personally begin to figure it out.
And not to be too involved in language philosophy, but the question that popped into my mind was, what is pleasure? I mean, is it a physical sensation, or is it the whole encompassing? Like a person involved in a sadomasochistic relationship in which they were getting very little could say, the pleasure I'm getting is in denial of pleasure.
Yes. Well, actually, that too is in this play, because as the play progresses, and each character begins to access on some level their sexuality, different things happen to them. There's an artist who suddenly seems freer to create art.
Yeah.
There's a
point.
wife who, when she feels her sexuality, wants to put away the electrical appliance and be kissed by her husband. There's another woman who is treated with the appliance who calls out the name of another woman. So I think the definition is that if you are in touch with that aspect of yourself, you are realized depending on who you are. I mean, I don't want to sum up Sarah's play in one word, but I think she sort of has a series of ways of looking at that, and there is no one answer about that. I think it depends on who you are and what comes out when you have access to that. Barry, I started to ask you a question a while ago. Any thoughts?
You didn't ask the question.
Well, the question really, I think, is, since you are an expert on this subject, have you ever heard of this? Are you familiar with these vibrators from that century?
Yeah, I read Rachel's book.
You read it?
Yeah. Well, something that's, don't these women have some kind of transfer of training? I mean, do they ever realize that, don't they have sexual interactions with their lovers or their husbands and make a connection between the effect of the vibrator and the effect of sexual intercourse?
Well, the answer is that we don't know. The doctors made that connection from Hippocrates forward. They would say if the woman is married, if she suffers from hysteria, if she's married, send her home to have sex with her husband. And if that doesn't work, then she comes back to the office and you massage her to the paroxysm. Now, the 19th century doctors don't make any connection with sex, but the earlier ones do make that connection. We don't have anything from the women themselves that really tells us what we'd like to know, which is another reason why it's so interesting to see this fictionalized portrayal of what the women might have said if they if we'd had their voices, which we don't. But there is the inventor of the steam-powered vibrator of 1869, George Taylor. All you have to do is say steam-powered vibrator, and people start to laugh. Coal-fired, doctors had to shovel coal into it. In any case, he said, you will have to explain to the women who use this machine that they, first of all, that you have to be careful, they'll want to overdo it. And the other thing is you'll have to explain to them that these unfamiliar sensations signal the return of health. And it's that unfamiliar sensations part that suggested to me that what was going on was a whole lot of androcentric sex, a lot of penetration of the vagina by the penis to male orgasm, and that's it. And now I'm speculating, but that's still, as you were saying, I've talked to a college student just the other day who said, yeah, that's still what college men think sex is.
I mean, you really all have to go see this play because at one point in the play, they are wondering what they are feeling. What was this? And
So in the play, do the women make a connection between?
They ask another character in the play, the wet nurse in the play. They describe their symptoms, the symptoms that they feel during treatment, a hot rash and tremors and
Make a face.
And what is this? And the character says, well, perhaps it's a form of illness, or it sounds like something that might happen when you have relations with your husband. And the two women are just they find that so hilarious. Absolutely not. I would never.
First they're struck.
They're struck mute by the thought.
It's a great moment. I definitely recommend it.
Yeah. So they do not associate it with any sexuality that they've experienced at all in the play. It's something completely different.
There's an interesting perspective on it is that there's an old study by Vance and Wagner in which they gave college men and college women, they asked them to describe their orgasms, and then they gave the descriptions. They eliminated any reference to any particular parts of the body, and they gave the descriptions to sex therapists and MDs, and various people, various sex experts to see, can you tell the difference, can you identify who the man is and who the woman is who's giving this description? And they were not able to make the discrimination. In other words, the description of the orgasms were equivalent to men and women when the body parts are removed. The increase in excitation and tension and the resolution, these kinds of things, feeling good and feeling extraordinarily good, and all these. So there was no difference between the descriptions. So,
how much is known about the biochemistry of it?
Well, a particular consistent theme is that dopamine seems to be released during orgasm, and the dopaminergic system is important in men and women orgasm. We see activation in the region that the dopamine system projects to, and a group in Holland shows that the origin of that pathway is also activated during orgasm. So there's that consistency, and also drugs that stimulate dopamine function stimulate sexual response and orgasm, and drugs that block it have the opposite effect, inhibit
Like
it.
L-DOPA type drugs, or
L-DOPA, actually, yeah, that's a precursor for dopamine, and that was used as a treatment for Parkinson's, and there are the early reports actually that led to the whole idea of dopamine as being involved, that men who were treated with L-DOPA for Parkinsonism got frisky, and their libido was stimulated, and that led to...
And what about women who were treated with
Yeah.
Well, it was mainly men. That was the original.
Hey.
But now, I don't know of any studies of the effect of L-DOPA on women, but drugs that stimulate the dopaminergic system do stimulate orgasm in women.
Thank you, because this brings up another point, and then I'll ask you, which is, who is writing about this? Who is taking the surveys about sexuality? And one of the things that we all discussed in rehearsal is if you have male doctors controlling the discourse and women having no voice in it, you have a certain result that we know. And what I found interesting was that, my generation, I came to sexual majority in the 60s, where you had for the first time women writing books about female sexuality, Our
Sherry Height.
Bodies Ourselves, Sherry
Yes,
Height, which
yes,
seemed quite a revolutionary thing, that it wasn't a man with, again, this wonderful quote of Sarah's, which I'll read one more time here. I'm sorry. What men do not observe because their intellect prevents them from seeing would fill many books. So for the first time, you had women who actually were listening to women, who were actually writing down statistics and collecting information for women. But that seems now like ancient history. It seems now that we've moved on into another world, which kind of appalls me. I thought that would be kind of par for the course, that women would be, focusing on this issue for other women. But that seems to have
I think
tapered off.
there are a substantial number of women working in the field of female sexuality. Ellen Lane in Holland, and I have 3 women working with me, and Beverly Whipple, 4 women working with me on our studies.
I want to say something. I mean, many things I want to say about Sarah's play, because I think that I'm a big fan of her play, and I know we're talking about something that the audience may not have seen. But one of the things I appreciate about the play is that it does not, I don't think, demonize men as the cause of robbing women, or as the man between a woman and her sexuality. I think that what makes her play really potentially timeless is that she is aware that all persons are alienated from their sexuality. It happens to be that the men are as clueless as the women. Nobody seems to understand that it's sex that's occurring. And I think that part of the power of the play is exactly that. If I comment on it from a psychoanalytic point of view, I realize that there's a little bit of danger, because our track record in women's sexuality is not absolutely awesome. But I do want to say that Freud was revolutionary in many, many respects. And one is that he recognized that women did have sexuality and were alienated from it. But also, I think he put on the table the question that for all of us all the time, we can never fully own our sexuality because it begins in childhood and it's always forbidden. And so forever, everybody is trying to reclaim this alien force. And it's almost impossible to do that, probably impossible. So that we can read books about, Barry's wonderful book about the orgasm, and we can learn tons and tons and tons about sex. But we still need to not fully claim it. And that's part of what keeps it mysterious and exciting, but part of what makes it a cause of illness, I suppose. I mean, I think I'm sort of rambling at length, but I think that I appreciate her play in that it doesn't demonize men as the cause of women's alienation from sexuality.
And she made that point that the character in the play is the physician who administers these treatments is caring. I mean, he's as in the dark as everyone else is. They are all searching for the causes of and cures for this disease. I mean, hysteria, Sarah told me, was actually diagnosed in the late 19th century, that 2/3 of all educated women suffered from hysteria. Or maybe you quote that in your book.
She's probably quoting me.
Yeah. 2/3 of educated women suffered from hysteria.
The comedic effect from the play comes from the fact that there's obviously sex occurring, and yet nobody seems to know it, right?
Yes.
And I do think that for all our living in an age of information and technology, it continues to be an issue. There are young women, I'm talking about only what I see in my office, but there are young women who are what we call sexting, right? They're texting sexy things to their friends and putting pictures of themselves on Facebook naked and making YouTube videos and tweeting about, what's the word? Tweeting about their sex life even as they're having it. And it seems for all the world as though they're really linked up with their sex life, but they're not. They're as confused about it, alienated from it. They may be using the technology of the day to having something very similar to what you see in the play, to be having a kind of experience that's both connected to and unconnected to simultaneously.
Yes.
So I think this knowing and not knowing is essential to the question of sexuality.
So in some regards, what you're saying is that providing information doesn't clear up the mystery.
Exactly.
That's a good point.
It's a relatively profound point. And true, it seems to me. Okay, I want to ask Barry again. Could you tell us a little bit about you wrote a book. Do people come to you and do they know everything that's in this book? I mean, is this something that you find is in the world in a way that is very non-mysterious now in terms of what an orgasm is, how to have one, or is it still considered as new and innovative and eagerly awaited as something like Our Bodies, Ourselves was back 40 years ago?
Well, the kind of contact I get from people is they have strange kinds of sexual responses, and they want to know what that's all about. Men who say they can have multiple orgasms, men who say they can have, women who say they can have orgasms just by thinking, and men who say they can have orgasms just by thinking. So people are, I guess, the main kinds of inquiries I get are people who want to validate their own experiences. And
what do you say?
I say that that's really interesting. I get some money, let's study it. Would you be willing to be a research participant? Because these are interesting phenomena. In fact, we're studying, we're doing brain imaging. I'm doing brain imaging now on women who can have orgasms just by thinking, without any physical stimulation at all. And this
Will
is
you write a book of instructions?
more we're asking them how they do it, and actually it could be potentially useful for women women or men who are anorgasmic, who can experience orgasms. Also,
or who have long, boring plane flights to sit through.
I was thinking of long, boring faculty meetings.
And also people, another kind of validation that was very important to us was women who with spinal cord injury, complete spinal cord, complete interruption of the spinal cord, and they said that they said their doctors tell them that they can't have any sensations, and they said that they were feeling vaginal stimulation, had menstrual cramps, and the doctor said it's all in their mind. They can't, and so. Well, but the thing, I studied that and found
mind.
that there is actually a pathway that bypasses the spinal cord. The
Why
vagus
wouldn't
nerve
there be?
passes.
Wow.
The vagus nerve
But it's also the same as phantom limb.
no, it's not the same as phantom limb. That's what they, John Money called it phantom orgasms. That's a misnomer altogether because
They're not phantom.
I mean, it's not. It's like saying phantom pain. It's not. The pain is real. It's the
Right.
phantom. The limb
That's
is phantom.
That's the term that's
But-
used.
But it's, I mean, I think it was a disservice for him to say that that it's phantom orgasms, because these women had vaginal and cervical sensation. They could feel it, even though they were paralyzed below the waist. They had no movement. They had no sensation of any from their limbs. But they said the only thing that remained was menstrual cramps.
But
And-
the term is not used to imply actually that it's not real. And in fact, Ramachandran's studies have shown what the reasons for it are. So it's not that it's not real. It's real, but it's not. There are the pathways that are cut, and it's happening here.
No, but the point
as
is,
opposed to somewhere else.
the point is that with the women who have a complete interruption of the spinal cord, there is a pathway. There is an anatomical, functional neural pathway that bypasses the spinal cord. That's what we found. It's the vagus nerve. Goes directly from the vagina and cervix to the brain. So there is actually a functional pathway. And when we showed that and we demonstrated that, and the women, this validated their sensations. When their doctors had told them that they can't, and they did. So a lot of what we do is validating people's descriptions of what they.
Now-
People who say they can have orgasms from stimulation of the lip or the breast, or I mean, now we're finding that when we're mapping the sensory cortex, and we've mapped the regions of the sensory cortex that respond to clitoral and vaginal and cervical stimulation. And we also, for reference, we mapped where the nipple self-stimulation projects to the sensory cortex. We find that it projects to exactly the same place as the clitoris, vagina, and cervix. It also projects to the chest area, but it projects right to the genitals.
Now, Barry,
These are validations of what people describe to us.
we many of us get our sexology information from the New York Times, and it's dramatic to
Daniel
read
Bergner is
within
a pioneer.
to read within a relatively short period of time. There's an article about sexual response saying that
Desire.
women are turned on by everything, right? I mean, do people remember that, reading that a few weeks ago? The bonobo monkeys
Yeah.
and the women are turned on
Yeah.
by anything you show
Well,
them. And
not
then
anything, but monkeys.
a lot. Okay.
Monkey sex.
And
as
then
opposed to
several-
men. That was the.
Several months later, we read that women aren't turned on by anything. So what do you make of that? Just a couple weeks ago, there's an article about how many women are coming with a complaint
Yeah,
of no sexuality. So we seem to be all over the
Well,
map here.
Yeah, well, there are people who have problems with sexuality and people who don't. So, I mean, as an MD, there's tremendous individual variability, and we don't really know what causes the variability. Why some people are anorgasmic. That is, they don't experience orgasms. In fact, I just got a grant with a urologist, Alan Seftel, because he claims that after prostatectomy, some men can still have erections, but they lose the ability to have orgasms. So we're looking at their brain activity to see is there some specific nerve that's cut, some pathway that's cut in the prostatectomy in those men And that would give us insight into what the pathway for orgasm is in men, because that's not known at this point. I mean, there are probably multiple pathways, but to identify what causes that problem. So individual differences. I mean, people who say they can have orgasms from hand stimulation of the hand, or anal stimulation, or mouth, or lips, or virtually any part of the body, from the ears. People, men and women, describe having orgasms from all different parts of the body. So, but not everybody can. So there's a lot of
The point,
of individual
you
difference.
I'm not a scientist or a doctor, so I'm coming through from a different kind of angle. But just to say something that has come up in our family, like my son, for instance, says, and this is running Yale Drama School, he doesn't think that you have to have a black man playing Othello. That was one of a big fight. How can a white man really understand Othello? We have a furious argument about this subject.
Understand what?
Othello.
Oh, Othello.
Yeah, more.
Yeah.
And this has come up. How can white people envision the imaginations of black people, Mexican people? How can we? And so the question comes up. You're delineating a purely area of dictated by anatomy, by the vicissitudes of anatomy and what they mean across genders. Either in men or women. But the fact is that what is the role that imagination plays in the creation of sexuality, and where the divide, like for instance, like I'm a writer, so I've written things from the point of view of a woman who loves other women, and I feel very comfortable in that territory. In fact, I often describe myself as having the sexuality of a woman who loves other women. There seems to be two realms in which this discourse can go on. One is the realm of purely the body, and then the other one is what separates us from other creatures is another element, which is those kind of higher brain functions.
I agree with you completely that the brain is the biggest sex organ in the body.
Yeah,
and I mean, one example is these many women who we've now studied who claim they have orgasms just by thought alone, and without any physical stimulation. And we measure their heart rate and their blood pressure,
Yeah.
and these physiological measures show activation increases just parallel to when they apply genital self-stimulation. So they really are having orgasms. In fact, we're doing in the brain imaging that we're doing now. We're finding a really surprising thing, that the conventional idea of the sensory cortex is that it responds to mechanical stimulation of specific parts of the body, and we're asking women to think of stimulation of their clitoris, or think of stimulation of the finger, or think of stimulation of the toe, and those specific parts of the sensory cortex become activated just by thinking.
Yeah.
And it's indistinguishable from the actual physical stimulation of those body parts. So, we're just beginning to understand things about the brain that we never knew before. And it's a remarkable organ. So, I'm completely in agreement with you that there are the things way beyond the physical stimulation that our brain is capable of doing. And we're just beginning to understand
I want to
it.
throw one last general question out, and then I think we're probably ready to take questions from the audience, because we've been here, only an hour.
You have time.
Sarah makes a point of setting this at the dawn of the age of electricity, and I mentioned her quote about the rediscovery of the female orgasm over time. I'm wondering if there was a period in history, or other periods in history, several periods in history, that were where humans were closer in touch with their sexuality, and what you feel today's time is. I mean, the Victorian era obviously is the classic example of a time when people are very out of touch with their bodies, the way they're dressed, what they speak, all the modesty issues that you know of dressing furniture. You could talk about this in so many different areas. So I think that's one of the reasons she set the play there, is because it's so extremely buttoned down, literally. And we see ourselves today as knowing everything, being open, but are we sexually more in tune, happier, really? Does information provide access?
You've got an implied norm in what you're saying that I think is causing us all to look at each other and say, wait a minute. You say that are we now more in touch with our sexuality than at other periods? It implies that there is some concrete thing, our sexuality, that we can be in touch with. And I think that what we're learning is that it is so malleable and culture-based that we wouldn't know our sexuality if we fell over it, which some of us do fairly frequently. But I think that's what the characters of the play are certainly doing that. But even the characters in Shakespeare who talk a lot of sexual talk in Shakespeare, both by women and by men. Do we want to say they're really in touch with their sexuality? We look at Othello, you know.
Or the Greek,
Or Hamlet, of course.
Your Hamlet, yeah. I mean, it's a good question because it really gets you to thinking about what would we mean by our sexuality.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of the Greek period, but then, of course, that's, again, only male sexuality,
Exactly.
probably.
Well, you know what the Greeks said? They said, let's see if I can remember how it goes. A goat for satisfaction, a woman for business, and a boy for pleasure. Well, that's a very different view of sexuality. And, of course, that's only the view of men who could afford to have all three possibilities. The goats, right. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm giving a sort of superficial answer because I'm not a historian of sexuality, but my guess would be yes and no. That's a safe answer. I think that there obviously are some periods in history where there's more alienation than others, and the Victorian period is famous for that, and it allowed, in a way, psychoanalysis to be invented because you could see this extreme split in the illness of hysteria. But the point that I made earlier, I would stick to, that sexuality is essentially what Peter Fonagy calls the alien force in human psyche, because his argument would be, and in a way it's very similar to Freud's idea, that sexuality begins in childhood and no parent can ever fully acknowledge the sexuality of a child for obvious reasons. It's alarming to them and arguably not good for the species for the parent to fully see it. And so it's always experienced by the child as some unacknowledged, quote, alien force, and that we can never really know it. I love that.
There are more problems when it's very fully acknowledged.
Right.
Like incest and so on, there's
That's
more
what you're
problems.
saying, yeah.
So
Yes,
I think that that's part of what makes it so marvelously mysterious and an endless source of subject matter for the arts, right? And for self-struggle.
There's another aspect to it, which is that there are other things that come out of the use of sexuality. You mentioned the girls who perform oral sex, or women who perform oral sex on a man, who may derive or frequently don't derive any pleasure from it, because what's in it for them? Well, but there are certain other kinds of pleasures that are gratified. For example, some women take tremendous amount of pleasure in having a man have a quick orgasm by what they have done to them. So it gives them a sense of power, a sense of sexiness, a sense of desirability. So all of these...
Well, Ed, and let's remember that the report of no pleasure has to be suspect
exactly.
in itself,
it's
as Sarah teaches
it's
that. Right?
Complicated, different layers of pleasure. I think what we are talking about, especially what you are doing work on, has to do primarily with genital orgasm, right?
Well, but it's
There are other mental pleasures that are connected.
but the mental orgasms are. I'm very interested in those.
No, I understand, but you assume that those mental orgasms are identical in terms of pleasure to the genital orgasms. What I'm saying is there are other kinds of pleasures that are derived from a man-woman interaction. So it's complicated in that
Yeah.
way. We can't just make a judgment about it at face value. It needs always further exploration to know exactly what is giving someone pleasure or no pleasure. Women who are anorgasmic, there are cases where a woman is anorgasmic with one man, very quickly orgasmic with another man. So it's not so...
That's right. That's why the Lysistrata, for instance, is a very interesting play. If you take it it's a play against war, but it's about the denial of sexuality. It's interesting questions are raised by that play.
It's also very funny.
It's very funny. I agree with that entirely.
But I think even in current day, in modern times, there are things that are monkey wrenches that are being thrown into sexuality. I mean, it was when Beverly Whipple started talking about the G-spot. Grafenberg discovered it in the 1950s. Which is interesting in itself because he didn't, and I've reread his paper over and over again to try to find out why was he looking for, why was he doing this? he never says why he's an MD in New York, and he never says why he was doing this stimulation. There was no reason for it. He just said
His
that,
vibrator broke down.
well, maybe, but he was doing it manually.
Maybe
But
he had a twitch.
maybe, but I was really puzzled.
It
Anyway.
was historical
Very-
archaeology. He'd read the Hippocrates on the manual stimulation to orgasm and decided to try it himself.
Yeah, but he doesn't explain why.
He doesn't mention that.
He doesn't mention why he got into that.
Barry's protecting me. He doesn't mention that in the green room I asked him, is there a G-spot? Which is my half hysteric, half psychoanalyst question about something that people talk about all the time and uncertainty about.
I don't think it's not a spot. It's an area of the anterior vaginal wall. It's an area where a number of different genitally sensitive structures converge, and by pressing into it, you're pressing the anterior vaginal wall, and that's stimulating the pelvic nerve, which can produce orgasms by itself, and you're pressing against the female prostate, which was probably innervated by the hypogastric nerve, which can also produce orgasms, and you're pressing against the urethra, which is also probably by the hypogastric nerve, and also pressing against the inner legs of the clitoris, which is innervated by the pelvic nerve, the pudendal nerve. So there are at least 3 different nerve pairs that are being stimulated by stimulating in that convergent area, and that's why
We could pitch your book here called Orgasm, because there seem to be like 4 or 5 different spots here that are discussed.
Oh well, yeah.
Try them all.
But
It's amazing that with that much nerve input that some people have difficulty.
that's true, and
That's
in
a
fact,
profound point you're saying.
Masters and Johnson. Just as recent as Masters and Johnson, they were saying that vaginal stimulation or cervical stimulation doesn't do anything, so that's one thing. We see that women can clearly have orgasms from vaginal stimulation or cervical stimulation, this is this massive innervation of these parts of the body.
Well, in fairness to Masters and Johnson, they were trying to put the clitoris on the map, right?
Well,
Freud
yeah.
said, "Don't touch it because it means you're a man." Right? If you fool around with it too much,
but they were downplaying the importance. They were saying that there's no sensitivity. In fact, there are medical reports saying that the vagina and cervix don't have any sensibility, which is crazy because it's, if they're talking about cutting it or cutting into it with a scalpel, but what about pressure? There's a whole thing about the adequate stimulus. So that's one thing that's something that has to be reformulated because the kind of pressure they put against vaginal sensation could have had a deleterious effect in the whole idea of sexuality. And then Elizabeth Lloyd, with her book, The Case of the Female Orgasm, she's saying that there's no function for women's orgasm, which, I had a big argument with her. I spent a lot of time in this book refuting the idea. She says that women's orgasm is the same as men's nipples, no function. And as you were saying before, the pleasure that women have in giving pleasure to men, it works reciprocally.
Sure.
That men have pleasure in eliciting women's
Arousal
orgasms.
in women.
And I suggest that the one of the functions is in mate selection. That if he who can elicit an orgasm in a woman, there's a connection there.
genes passed on. His genes get passed on. But
Well, or vice versa.
But
Women,
what about rape?
and what about?
The genes get passed on then too.
Yeah, but so what? What's?
It suggests that orgasm and rape are equally successful passing on genes. That's. I think that
Let's say
Elizabeth.
there are many ways to pass
That's what
genes.
Lloyd
Some are
makes
good and
that
some are
point.
not good.
What about animals? I mean, like you have estrus, you know, I mean, is there an equivalence in animal behavior? I mean, between what we call orgasm in humans and...
Well, there's evidence that some monkey species show uterine contractions during sex, and whether that's probably the closest thing. I mean, whether rats show orgasms, it's not really clear. Although they show muscle tension and they show uterine contractions, but orgasm is more than just uterine contractions. So. I mean, it's
now, I was told that in the 17th century, or maybe 18th century, people used to believe that orgasm was required for reproduction. Is that what you were explaining to us? And therefore, they tried very, very, very hard to have them, and then they sort of forgot about that.
well, it's clearly it's not
Victorian.
necessary for pregnancy,
Right.
but there
But people
is
imagine
evidence
that it
that orgasm, uterine contractions accelerate sperm transport, increase the amount of sperm that's brought into the uterus, and and also increases the amount that's propelled toward the side that ovulates to the egg, increases the number of sperm that are transported to the egg, and women who show that selective transport have a greater likelihood of getting pregnant than women who don't show that differential transport of sperm to the side that ovulates. A group by Wilt in Germany has shown that. So, I mean, there is evidence, and there is not too much, but there's some evidence that orgasm has a degree of increasing the likelihood of pregnancy. So there is evidence of a function of the orgasm.
Thank goodness,
in
because then
women.
we can justify trying to have it more.
Although, I mean, and it's also pleasurable, and it also.
You're saying it's also naturally selective in a strange way.
Well, it can be. Elizabeth Lloyd refutes that idea because she says that women don't have orgasms for intercourse.
I'm
I'm an Elizabeth Lloyd fan. What can I say?
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not.
I mean,
I've had
yes, should we
arguments
open
with
to
him.
questions?
When you're ready.
Okay.
Come on up to the mic because we want to capture you
Someone's phone is
in
ringing.
general.
I've been known to take too much time here, but I want to make a number of points, but I'll try to do it real quickly. First, on the idea of transport, why does it take whatever it is, 6 billion, 4 billion sperm?
who are you, Bob?
Bruce Scalero from Washington.
I know.
Okay, so I'm an analyst in Washington. Why does it take so many billions of sperm to fertilize one egg? They don't ask directions. A couple of historical questions.
That was a good start.
I have an end too, but I want to be fast. I want to be fast. Okay. Freud and vibrators. Can someone tell me, where it's documented and when he used it? Also, in the play, the man had his orgasm by the vibrator in his anus with supposed prostate stimulation. I wonder if that was literally true. In terms of the vagus nerve connections, Fleece was, in quotes, a kind of analyst for Freud, who he corresponded with in the late 90s. He was an ENT, and Fleece had elaborate ideas about the nasal-vaginal connection, which created excitement and orgasm. And there's some truth to it because of the importance of smell. The people talking about getting in touch with one's sexuality, at first it sounded vague from my point of view, but Ed and Elizabeth, I think, have clarified. There's a difference between these women are aware of sexual feelings, at least in my opinion is, but that's different from having full knowledge of their anatomy and all the response. In the play, the doctor and the women at first, well, more the doctor showed immense splitting. We call it disavow. You can't. How could he not know that these women were being sexually excited? I mean, he didn't want to know it because
He was a hysteric.
Yeah, he was an hysteric. He had to isolate off. He had a job to do until the very end. But he had a job to do, and he had to.
Then he had a bigger job to do.
He had a bigger job. He had to separate that off.
Don't
And by
give
the way,
away the ending.
the reversal of nudity, I think, was fascinating, which leads me to a comment about Last Tango in Paris, where Bertolucci didn't have Brando nude. There was a scene. Brando said, let's come without touching. So that's been verified. Okay, let me finish here. I do not believe that young women until they're in their late 20s don't have sexual excitement. Whether they're giving blowjobs or in any form. Young women don't masturbate. Teenage women don't masturbate. Not with the same frequency of men, but there's some form of masturbation going. Solitary masturbation with or without vibrators going on. But there's the confusion.
Okay, well, there's so many questions to address here.
What do women want? One very savvy woman answered the question this way. To me, have men puzzled by that question?
Men ask.
Do you want
Anybody
to
want to say
answer anything?
Well, there were so many.
Two comments. One, the men, you said about men having orgasms from anal or prostate stimulation. Yes, certainly. That's it's well documented. I don't know how common it is, but it's well documented, and it's not surprising because at least the pelvic nerve innervates. As the pelvic nerve innervates the rectum and innervates the vagina, and so there's a common pathway that way. And the point about the nasal and the genital, they both become turgid. They both become engorged during sexual stimulation. That's the connection.
That was what Fleece thought. The engorgement is what he
Yeah.
Yes, and what about that question about Freud, about his work
I'm
with
not aware of
vibrators?
that, but
I never heard of
I
that.
believe in our
I've heard
historian
that
here.
He used, early on, he used those machines that gave electric stimulation to the body. Whether it was your back, your arm, that was a common method of treatment in Vienna at that time and in other parts of the world. But whether he actually gave vaginal stimulation to women with that machine, whatever the machine was, I have no idea.
Do you know?
I was puzzled by that.
He actually he knew about vibrators because he was at the Salpêtrière where Charcot and his colleagues, including Gilles de la Tourette, of whom Tourette syndrome, that fellow, actually invented a head vibrator, which is kind of sort of a strange. But in any case, Freud's biographer, one of his biographers, says of him that he tried to learn the manual massage techniques for hysteria, but he wasn't any good at it. He put it that way. He said he wasn't satisfied with the results.
I feel like a lightning bolt will hit this room.
Well, this is the guy who doesn't know what women want, right? I mean,
Well, we don't know what that is.
so we don't really know exactly what happened, but he decided that physical therapy for hysteria was, he'd just sit him up and talk to him and see what happened.
So we
It's
could
not
say-
completely true that Freud didn't know what women wanted. He said that in a specific context, because years earlier than that, with some of the hysterics, he jokingly said to his friend, what they need is a prescription for penis.
So, yes,
So he
one of
knew
his
exactly
mentors had
what
said
we-
that to him.
Yes, Charcot. Yes,
He
Charcot
knew
thought it was a
what
sexual thing.
He
yeah.
knew though, but he meant something else. It had to do a lot more with their general psychology than sex. His comment about. not
Oh,
wanting
yes,
to
we
do that.
wanted to have one rather than wanting to engulf one. Right. Well, when I first saw them, I thought they were some kind of tumor, but that was because I hadn't been explained to me why this guy, I thought, You know, I only knew my own genitals when I was a little kid. The first time I saw a guy naked, I thought, God, what happened to him? I hope I don't get it. Go ahead.
Robert Williams was very good on that in his last show. Several questions and a point.
Who are you?
Oh, I'm Sue Shapiro, and I love Rachel's book, and I saw it years ago, and I had recently written an article called The Embodied Analyst in the Victorian Consulting Room, where I was struck also by this sort of discrepancy between people's bodily experience and our theorizing. And actually that gets me out of order, but that I used a lot of Thomas Laqueur, and I know that people disagree about his reading of things, but that his suggestion is that pre-Enlightenment there was an idea of one sex and that women and men were inside out, and that actually anatomical drawings from that period with the shading make the point of how similar our genitals are, and that actually so in the 16th century, 17th century, there was the idea both that orgasm was necessary for conception and that stimulating women was important, so that the advice given to Princess Maria Theresa when she was infertile was that her husband should titillate her vagina, her vulva more, and the vulva of Her Most Holy Majesty should be titillated before intercourse, and that there was this whole idea of stimulation of the woman. So it was a very different idea back then. And clearly also we're neglecting, I think, the enormous individual variation in sexual response. So it seems like some of the men here probably haven't had orgasms through anal stimulation, and some have. And women vary enormously in their masturbatory history. And we know from our responses with antidepressants and that people have different responses to them, and some of them interfere with sexuality. And there's an antidepressant that's not on the market, ammoniptine, that was created by Servier in France, and that gives spontaneous orgasms to some people. Which made me think about the thinking.
Where can you get that one?
I'll give you the website. I have the secret to getting that one.
Is that the one where you have an orgasm every time you sneeze?
I don't know, maybe.
That happened too.
That happens too. But the other thing is that there was a book written, I think, in the late 1990s about a doctor in Utah, a Mormon doctor who was sexually abusing many, many women in the community. And the way he was doing it was that there would be a screen, and he would examine them, and many of these women had not much information about sex, and so he would be having intercourse with these women, and they wouldn't know it. And it took many, many women had been violated before finally somebody realized, just like the idea of knowing what was happening with the vibrator, that in fact this was sexual. So that what we know or think about and our fund of information is very significant in how we interpret sensation. So just that.
So you were saying that the women did not recognize that was what was penetrating them was his penis. They thought it was something else. Their finger.
They thought it was, they thought it was an instrument. And they also didn't think of it as anything sexual. It was a medical exam. Now, obviously, some people think of medical exams as sexy, but others don't. And many of these women were virgins, didn't know anything.
Did they get pregnant?
I don't know if he used a condom or not. I forget, but I will get you the reference to that.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
There's a very moving has a section in this. There's a movie made about my. Plug the play enough now. I can plug the movie. There's a movie made from my book called Passion and Power. It's by Wendy Slick and Emiko Omori, and I of course warmly recommend it. And there's a wonderful scene with Betty Dodson, whom some of you have probably heard of. She lives right here in New York City.
Yep.
She is an amazing person. She really lends a whole new meaning to the expression "little old lady." My husband says of her, and in fact, and of Del Williams, that you certainly know some shocking old ladies. But anyway, she has a wonderful passage in there where she talks about having realized, you know, that her like one labia was longer than the other, and that her I can't remember, I think it's her inner lips longer than her outer lips. Oh, it must be awful. It must be because of all that childhood masturbation. And she goes through having the process of learning that, you know, sometimes it's one way, sometimes it's the other way. You know, that people have different shaped genitals. And she says this wonderful thing about it. She says, I'm a, you know, sophisticated New Yorker, and I'm an educated woman, and I just didn't know anything about my own body. And if that was true of me, it had to be true of a lot of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's always been true. And she says it especially eloquently.
Okay, yes.
Hi, I'm Kathy Dalsimer. I'd like to add a developmental dimension to this conversation we're having. You spoke about males controlling the discourse, as there seems to be an asymmetry in our conversation this afternoon, in fact, that men who are a minority in this room are actually dominant in the discussion. I would like to speak about the developmental context in which we all begin our conscious sexual lives, and that there's such an asymmetry between males and females in that. In adolescence, pre-adolescent boys have erections involuntarily. They have wet dreams involuntarily, pretty much universally so far as my own clinical experience suggests. Whereas I think for girls in those years of adolescence and into young womanhood, there's more of a nuanced kind of discovery of her own bodily sensations. And in my own clinical experience, I would say it continues to the present day, that masturbation is not as universal among adolescent girls and young women as it is among males. I'm struck by the fact that when a boy begins to have wet dreams, there's such a rich slang vocabulary for talking about jerking off, whacking off, and so on. I don't know of any such slang for girls. So a boy who's starting to, you know, feel overwhelmed by the feelings that are happening to him, just knows, just by the existence of this language, that other boys do it too. You know, there wouldn't be a need for these words if other boys. Whereas for a girl, it is a more, I think usually a more private kind of discovery, and one that, you know, continues. Biology brings changes to her throughout her life.
The slang overlates to menstruation. The female slang.
Yes, that's a very good.
I had my visitor, you know.
Yeah.
The curse, yep, the curse.
To Betsy's point about Masters and Johnson trying to put the clitoris on the map, this is my lesson. There used to be programs on the radio in the early 70s about people talking about how they began masturbating, and apparently a lot of women under the faucet of the bathtub was a popular spot. But somebody was talking about how she used to masturbate by sliding down the banister in her house, and how dismaying it was to entertain the thought of one day saying, "Mom, Dad, I'd like you to meet the banister." It's not a question.
I think we have another question, though. Oh, the gentleman first, or were you, what? Oh, you're, okay.
Hi, my name is Laura Rodriguez. I'm a student of English at the Grad Center in Manhattan. I kind of came to this talk with sort of not really sure what I was entering into, but I felt like I had really learned a lot. It was the title of the talk that had interested me, Love and Pleasure in the Age of Electricity. And so I was coming to this talk as someone who's interested in cybernetics and also cybersexualities. And really, I was kind of struck by how the conversation not exactly. It was that a lot of the conversation went to a discussion of bodies and orgasm and anorgasmic possibilities or non-possibilities. But I'm sort of interested in maybe there being a little bit more commentary that has something, I guess, to say about sexuality as being transformed because of how technology really is.
You know, you're right on the money, and Sarah deals with that as well, and I would like to know what you think about that, because one of the things she poses, no playwright poses, but one of the things that's in the air of this play is, does the invention of electricity make things better sexually, and has the internet made things better, different sexually? What do you think?
Oh, I think it certainly has. And I mean, in the sense of, well, I'm not trying to really speak for me or friends, but in the sense of I am kind of curious about the ways in which technology, we have to sort of look at it different. If we're talking about electricity as a form of technology.
Well, that's 100 years ago.
Yeah, I'm starting to think then about if we talk about the technologies of writing, and I'm thinking about Donna Haraway's work and the sense of how the computer, like this metaphor, I'm really fond of being plugged in, and what it means to be plugged into a system and this kind of information circuit, which means our sexualities then become subject to not just performativity, but this instability. So in the sense of we start moving away, I'm kind of working on this article with a former professor about how we're moving away from the body in our sexualities discourse because probably of a lot of focus on the internet and performative sexualities. But I kind of think there is something more to be explored about what our relationships are to machines, not just dildos, but like writing machines particularly. And I was wondering if you could specifically say more about
Do you, are you familiar with, I think the author's name is Robert Levy, it's called Love and Sex with Robots. It's a
heard of it. I haven't read
wonderful
it.
book. It's a very interesting book. When I was asked to review it, I thought, Love and Sex with Robots. But it's very interesting. He uses, one of the metaphors that he uses about how humans can humanize just about anything is, we have pets. And we attribute, we talk to them, we attribute emotions to them, we turn them into sort of, our other selves. And he also talks about the phenomenon in Japan of, you have these inanimate pets that are actually devices. And I don't know about writing machines, but certainly writing is a very sexy thing. I mean, look at the Brownings. Look what happened to the Brownings. They started writing, the next thing you know, they're married. And who knows what in between. But yes, there's a lot. That's a very interesting subject, and I think that if we had some way of assigning mentalities to robots, which Levy suggests we soon will, which I think is probably correct. If we can project onto other things, we can certainly project onto robots. That we're liable to have people forming long-term relationships with robots. The internet, I think, is the internet. There's a colleague of mine, a wonderful guy. He's a great guy and a fine scholar. And aside from that, I can't think of a good word to say about him. Named Jonathan Coopersmith, who's at Texas A&M. And he wrote a great article called "Pornography and Progress." You've heard of it? Oh, good. Oh, he'll be so happy. I'll tell him. He'll be so happy. His point is that whenever there is a new technology available, doesn't matter what it is, pornography instantly gets hold of it. That sexuality just pounces on it. And it happened with cabinet cards and photography. It happened with film. It happened with the telephone, the fax machine, everything. The internet. And it's a very interesting hypothesis. And the best thing about it, the thing that appeals to me especially, the historian of technology in me, is that he points out, Jonathan does, Coopersmith, that it provides, the fact that sexuality seizes on these new technologies provides the capital for these technologies to expand into other areas, which is what happened with the internet.
Can I also just, in that point, then bring up the real doll?
Oh, I've heard of this.
Yeah.
Tell us more. Tell us
Lars
more.
and the real girl.
The real doll being like I don't really know how to even describe it, because I guess I walk around assuming that most people know what a real doll is.
We're much older than you are, so you'll have to tell us.
Is
Sort of
it
like a
like the inflatable things, only different?
So not like an inflatable sex doll, but better in the sense of more technologized, because the skin feels
More
real,
functionality.
feels functional. You can change the appendages of the mouth, right? You can actually give it real human hair, real pubic hair. They're made to special order.
Where do these appear?
There's a really great documentary on it.
Ladies cannot afford this kind of thing.
They're really expensive. There's one I know at the Sex Museum here in Manhattan, like a body of one, but in the sense of how that, as a technology, changes our relationship. Not just to people, but really like it is something that has a market, and how that does change sort of Americans' relationship with sex, as in, you no longer need the other person, and you don't even need a dildo because you have a doll that's very close to the real thing.
Well, you also don't need a prostitute. And I think that's where the disconnect is, that they're a threat to the profession of prostitution.
That's terrible.
Especially if they're programmable. And there are some people, I hate to say this, but there are some people out there who really don't deserve sexual partners that are real human beings.
I wanted to ask you something about what Dr. Auchincloss said at some point today, is that whether it was Twitter or Facebook or something.
I wanted to put on the table the question you raised about the modern technology and especially young women.
And it seems to me one of the things it can do is make you do things that you wouldn't normally do. So a young woman who puts her naked picture at the age of 15 on Facebook, it's very unlikely she's going to go in front of boys naked, but she can do that on the internet. Mm-hmm. Is it a way that you can do things that you would be too anxious to do normally in real life?
Yeah,
Or that would be too dangerous to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right, because you're not really exposed. It's only your image
Second
that's
life.
exposed.
Well, it could lead to,
Yeah.
like in the case of the woman, the case of that horrible situation where the girl
suicide,
had the suicide business with the.
I think that's definitely an interesting question. And in terms of performative identities, I don't want to out myself, but yeah, I think there is this sense of once the technology is there and the screen is there, there is a sort of freedom that I think a lot of definitely younger women and also a lot of gay, lesbian, trans individuals feel like they're entitled to a certain act, performance freedom that real life, whatever you want to really call it, particularly real sexuality doesn't give them. Is that healthy or unhealthy? Some people are very quick to demonize cybersexualize and say, well, that's just kind of weird because it's not real sex. But I think it is a really interesting question how technology sort of changes how we interact with other people and how we conceive of ourselves as sexual people, and particularly for younger women, that avenue of, am I self-distributing or am I self-exposing, or this is an option that I can do something with a video camera right here and also have this sort of connection, right, with tons of other people, and it's anonymous, but I don't have to have the chastised, feeling of being a whore, right? I don't have to have the public school reputation. I don't know, but I think it changes things a lot, and I'm really glad that it's made its way into the conversation.
Thank you.
you.
You made it.